I will just talk about a particular aspect of Iqbal's philosophy. Just on a light mood, when we were children in the schools, or most of the children, and whenever there were the Allama Iqbal's poetry in the textbooks, it was the most difficult thing for the student to understand. And I believe actually the mental horizon of Allama Iqbal is so high that until and unless you have the same kind of knowledge, it's very difficult to understand him as well. I will try my best to make it as simple as possible. I'm talking about his philosophy of khudi, ego. That's called ego. What is ego? Actually, this concept of ego, you can say, is the cornerstone of Iqbal's philosophy. And this he has explained in his book, Khudi, which was later on translated by his teacher, Professor R. Nicholson of Cambridge. And he named this book as Secrets of the Self, and was published from London in 1920. So you see, very early. Now, what is the philosophy of khudi? Thank you. Khudi is actually the progress of self, the evolution of self to some heights, rather ultimate heights, I would say. Because when the ego, the human beings are able to elevate it to such heights that where Iqbal wants them to do it, as in Urdu then we say, we can translate it later on, खुदी को कर बुलंद इतना कि हर तकदीर से पहले खुदा बंदे से खुद पूछे बता तेरी रज़ा क्या है. And the translation is that you take the ego to such heights where the God Almighty, before taking any decision, ask the person, what you want, tell me. So this is what Allama Iqbal thinks about this khudi. So he believes that this khudi is the root of all existence, an entity which may appear to be perishable, but which can attain immortality. Which seems perishable, but which can attain immortality. I will explain in a while what he means by this. So the human ego has the ability to grow by absorbing the elements of the universe, as well as the ability to incorporate the attributes of Allah, God Almighty. So if you are able to absorb the values of the universe and the attributes of Allah, that will elevate your khudi, the dignity, as Mr. Nadeem brother said, dignity. Because if you are able to absorb these qualities, then you know what is ego. But how you achieve this ascension of ego? It needs continuous efforts. Fighting against own self, which is actually self-control. About this, Iqbal says, in the words of Iqbal, self-control in individuals builds families. In countries, it builds empires. It's very important to the current situation. Why we are suffering? Because we have unrestricted control on our wishes. We just follow our wishes. We don't have control on them. And what is the result? You see the result, where we are. It's because of this problem. We don't have self-control on ourselves. So, to achieve this, you need to fight with your own self. And then against the external forces as well. Because external forces have an influence on you. If you have control on yourself, then you can control the outside forces as well. These external forces sometimes, rather most of the time, if you don't have control on yourself, determines your actions because you react to that environment. Because until unless you are unaware of your own powers, then you are driven by the current. As in English says, and that's probably relevant here to say, do in Rome what the Romans do. But that's not Iqbal's message. And that would, Nadeem Samuzar saying, sitting in Hong Kong doesn't mean that you do what the Hong Kong people do. You do what is your belief, what is right, what is wrong. You should know that. Because if you are driven by the current, as Iqbal says, then you don't have control on yourself actually. The external environment is influencing you. But once you control yourself, in that you control the outside, and then what happens? You become the master of your destiny. Then you are not told what you do, what you not do, because you know what to do and what not to do. You are not then influenced by the environment as such. Now, to achieve these kind of controls, then you have to follow certain ways, and those ways are meditations and prayers. So that also involves faith, and with that also comes love. Love of the Holy Spirit, love of the God, love of the Prophet, or the message of Allah. And that's why it is believed that love is the foundation material of everything, including self-knowledge. In this regard, Iqbal says, love is the foundation of life. Love is the flashing sword of death. The hardest rocks are shivered by love's glance. But remember one thing, Allama Iqbal's love is not material love. His love is spiritual love. And then he believes that how you get closer through this love to Allah or God, he believes that since the place of God is in your heart, it is love that purifies your heart. The God place is in your heart. And then what purifies heart? That is love. Ishq hakiki, the spiritual love. Because that will clean your heart from worldly rubbish and makes that a heart a worthy place of God. And it is believed that this process of heart purification is the foremost step towards self-control or self-awareness. Because if your heart is dirty, then you can imagine what will happen. But if your heart is clean, then the world will be open to you. Now, this is again also related to ego, because there is a Danish philosopher, his name is Kierkegaard. He believes, the same like Allama Iqbal, that trying to know the self, ego and heart, with impure heart is self-deceit. If you are trying to control yourself through your impure heart, it's not possible. But then Iqbal carries the love to the highest point and connects it with God. In one of his verses he says, beginning of the journey to the self is love, and the end is beauty. By beauty he means Almighty Allah. So, love deepens the transparency in an individual, and with passage of time, then his heart becomes more and more transparent. And in this process, the more he purifies his heart, the more he gets closer to the God. And then a time comes when he himself sees God in his own self. These are some difficult philosophical thinking, like it takes me to Mansur al-Hallaj. What is Mansur? Al-Hallaj. His Hallaj.
Mansur Hallaj.
His declaration when he said, Ana al-Haq. People could not understand him and what they did to him. It didn't mean that he was saying, Nauzubillah, I am the God. He was not saying that. But he had reached that elevated position. Where could he see all in his persons the God? A famous poet of Indo-Pakistan subcontinent named Shah Beek, in this regard, has two verses which says how he talks about the truth. The one who talks about truth, he knows not. But one who knows, he speaks not. Now, Iqbal's philosophy of ego, khudi, it has to pass through certain stages. And for achievement of this, as I said, purification of heart is very important. Self-control is important. And ultimately then he is able to control his environment and himself. In his own words, what he said, Allama Iqbal, physically as well as spiritually, man is a self-contained career, but he is not a complete individual because he is away from God. The greater his distance from God, the less his individuality. He who comes nearest to God is the complete person, rather the completest person. Nor that he is finally absorbed in God. On the contrary, he absorbs God into himself. The true person not only absorbs the world of matter by mastering it, he absorbs God into his ego by assimilating divine attributes. Well, when I was reading this ego, I came across this idea as well, that Allama Iqbal was not like the Sufis, because Sufis they believe in self-negation, that you negate yourself and you absorb yourself in the God's way. Allama Iqbal, in a way, he says, no, if you negate yourself, you disappears. You elevate your ego, yourself, so your existence is there. And then you absorb the God's attributes in your personality. Now, for Allama Iqbal, the journey of selfhood must in no case seek an end. Iqbal says that self is lost in the search of an end. No, it should not be like that. It is the journey to the land of love, and the traveler in this vast land of love must never try to relax, like Brother Haq also talked about that, Ravani to opposite here. As the relaxation brings one to an end, and the end of the journey becomes death. A spiritless person, life comes to an end with the death. But the one with authentic self and possessing transparent heart never dies. That one I was in the beginning saying, immortality. So when you have this elevated ego, you have achieved those attributes, you never die. Because Iqbal says that action alone is the highest. Now, you said that there should be Ravani, which is action actual. Action alone is the highest form of contemplation. If man wants eternal life, immortality, he should never relax. Man's authentic self is never asleep. His inner eye is always open. His life does not end with the death and destruction of his finite body. Because death is a transit moment for him. He enters the eternal soonest the moment of death is past. Death, says Iqbal, is renewal of the life that takes the man to a new world, which is more illuminated than ever before, like all we Muslims believe. This is a temporary life. Hereafter will be the permanent life. So if you have achieved that attributes of God, and you are not materialistic, remember, I will come a little bit later on to it. Because for materialist people, the whole world is this world. With your death, everything ends. But if your ego is illuminated, then it is a transit from temporary world to the permanent world. And that is when he was talking about human immortality. Well, your physical body finishes, obviously, but body is the combination of two things. One is your body, flesh and bones, and the second, more important, your soul. And these two things makes a body, a unit. And that's what Iqbal talks about it as well. So the soul development is actually spiritual development. The soul development is spiritual developments. And for that, you need a lot of sacrifices. You have to give a lot of sacrifices. Because to bring these two things in harmony, you need self-control. The soul and the material life. They are the flesh and the bones. Another important thing which he talks about in the context of ego is that ego is individual and ego is collective. Individual, well, it is simple. But collective is of the society ego. And how he says about this Iqbal view, human beings' aspiration to achieve perfection necessarily requires the achievement of a balance between the individual ego and the collective ego. In Iqbal's words, the life of the ego is a kind of tension caused by the ego invading the environment and environment invading the ego. As I was saying, external forces and internal forces. The ego does not stand outside this arena of mutual invasion. It is present in it as a directive energy and is formed and disciplined by its own experiences. So first individual interacts with his own ego and then interacts with the collective ego. While doing that self-control, he questions himself. He criticizes himself and then comes out with answers. In a nutshell, out of this, what we can say is that the one through ego, one learns self-respect, self-love, and self-affirmation. And if you are able to earn these things, then only in this manner you can respect others' egos as well. And that is important. Iqbal argues that the human ego has a central place in the universe, which it is at the same time intimately linked with the ultimate ego. By ultimate ego, he means the God himself. In his own words, throughout the entire gamut of being runs gradually rising note of the egohood until it reaches perfection in man. That is why the Quran declares the ultimate ego to be nearer to man than his own neck vein. Sharak Sibi. Yeah. So if you reach that position, then God you find closer than your own neck vein. Allama Iqbal believes to achieve this elevated position, the ego has to pass through 3 stages. And 3 stages he has explained is number one, which is the lowest one, is itaat, or obedience to the divine law. That is the beginning. The next step is the zabt-e-nafs, or self-control, which is the highest form of self-consciousness or egohood. And then the peak of that is niyabate ilahi, or the vicegerency of God on earth. When the gods say insan about human being that they are ashraful makhlukat. That's how you reach that position. So through these stages, human being then can achieve immortality. As I said, because then death becomes that is not important for him. Because that is just a transit step from one life to another life. And thus he becomes eternal. As earlier I said, I would not come to it because it's getting late already. About the soul, I would once again come to that soul part because Allama Iqbal has put emphasis on that. And I think Nadeem also mentioned about that in his couplet when he said, because this is where he calls that divine spark in the soul. You need a divine spark in the soul for progress. And Iqbal said in that, the ambience of the divine light is shrouded, this is a couplet, translation. The ambience of the divine light is shrouded with this very body of clay. O you heedless person, You are much more than a sentient being. So this divine part in your soul is very important for the growth of ego and the self. That is the problem in the modern world, that they have lost cognizance of this divine spark. The world has achieved materialistic development, technological, scientific, economic, but at what expense? At spiritual expense, this divine spark. Because if you lose this divine spark, what happens then to human beings? Then he or she falls prey to the false sense of personal liberty. हम कहते हैं ना, बल्कि we in Pakistan says mother pidar azadi. Mother pidar azadi means there are no bounds. You are free.
Absolute freedom.
Absolute freedom. But actually you are not free then. You become slave to many people. Actual freedom, what is actual freedom? If you are associated with God, then you are actually free. In this sense, I can recall a couplet which says, कि एक सजदा जिसे तू गिरां समझता है, हजार सजदों से देता है आदमी को निजात. The one prostration which you make to the God, and you believe it's very difficult. It is not actually difficult. If you prostrate before one God, then you get freedom from thousands of such prostrations before other people. Because then your wishes are controlled. You have control on your wishes. What makes you more slave? When you have more wishes. I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this. Then you care about everything. Everybody who you believe that they have control over these things, so it's better to get closer to them. Right? But if you don't believe in these things, you believe in God, you just prostrate before God. These are material things. And they would come anyway. But you are not bothered about that, even if they don't. So, Allama Iqbal believes that this divine spark in soul is important. Because if it dies, then human beings become like an animal, Homo sapiens. He loses or she loses all senses of his or her humanity. Look what the materialist people are doing. There is no morality for them. To achieve a particular thing, they can do anything. Because that is the end. Means are not important for them. End is important for them. But for a true believer, the means are also important, and when it's okay, but means are also important. And that's what Iqbal also believes. What teaches you these means? In Iqbal's view, that is religion. Not science, not philosophy. Because he believes that science is compartmental. It deals partially with human beings. Philosophy, it takes only your mind in consideration. There is no practical thing. So, for him, Iqbal, religion is the key. He believes that religion can deal with all human beings' requirements and his confusions as well. Iqbal believes that, I will say, because of the obvious limitations of science, as I explained, and philosophy, it is equally obvious that the human being cannot truly realize his or her humanity if the individual is left to depend upon his or her physical, which is science, and mental, which is philosophy capabilities alone. In other words, the human ego cannot fulfill its true potential if the individual avails him herself only of the resources of science and philosophy. For Iqbal, it is only religion that can provide the intimate and holistic knowledge of reality. Reality means God. The type of knowledge that is an essential prerequisite for the realization of our humanity. Well, this is how Iqbal talks about his philosophy of Khudi, through which he actually finds the means to reach God. That is the ultimate goal. But in this process, obviously, there are different stages. There are benefits for the individuals as well. As I said, once you are able to control yourself, then you are able to control your environment. And when you are able to do that, you are then the master of your own destiny. Then you are not the tools in the hands of others. You are the master of the destiny. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Saab. If we become slave only of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then we truly find ourselves human as the crown of entire creation. And if we become slaves of desires, then we will never be able to find ourselves and our true dignity.